All right, it's officially showtime. Good evening, everybody. How you doing? Welcome to our amphitheater. This is our live streaming demonstration tonight. I want to introduce the program, the team. My name is Chris Rochelle, and I'm one of the gaffers here at the museum, a full-time glassmaker, and welcome to everybody that's joining us online as well. Tonight's demonstration is going to be about an hour long, give or take, and it's to support an exhibit that we currently have up at our museum called Past Present. So before we get into the glassmaking, we're going to talk a little bit about that exhibit. We're going to show some slides and a video about that show. But I'd like to introduce our team. I'm joined with Troy. He's going to be talking about the exhibit quite a bit. Once I kick it off to him, Michael Beam, Helen Tegler, Katie's another one of our glassmakers that will join us. Amanda's going to be doing some online moderating, and Alexis is up there in our booth. She'll be doing a lot of the mixing, getting some really good video shots online on our monitors here. But I'll kick this off to Troy, and he'll send it back to me. So thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight, and enjoy the show.
Great. If I could go ahead and have the slides, please. My name's Troy Smythe, and I am the manager of interpretation and education projects for the museum. And what that means is I work with all kinds of content experts here at the museum about the collection, things we collect, things we have on loan. And I'm a content strategist, so my job is to kind of help people make sense of the objects that we have to share with them. So that's going to be the hat I'm wearing tonight. So I wanted to introduce you to the exhibition Past Present. If you go up to section 6A on your map, that's where you'll find it in the museum. But the exhibition is really centered on this idea that glass isn't just what it's made to be. So it starts out as something that's made by a person to be a certain thing. But the longer a piece of glass exists in the world, the more stories it collects over time. And the exhibition Past Present, really, the subtitle of it is Expanding the Stories of Glass, looks at many different stories that glass, like a snowball rolling down a hill, amasses over time. And we look at each object in a different way. This is a couple of pictures of the exhibition when you go in there. One of the things we really wanted to pull out is not just the museum's voice and the stories about the objects that they tell, but also the community voice as well. So there are different voices represented in the exhibition from all around the area, all around the country actually. But there's also opportunities for you as the visitor to add your story to the exhibition as well. So that wall you see in the back that looks like it has paper on it is actually where you can actually add your voice to the exhibition. So we're going to talk about, in particular, one aspect of the exhibition. What you're looking at here is one of the cases that contains a match safe, a beaded match safe made in this area. And on the right is actually a video that we're going to talk a little bit more about in just a little bit. But here's a close-up of it. So match safe may be even kind of a new idea. We don't necessarily think we have to keep our matches safe. But there was a time when matchbook covers and match boxes weren't necessarily that common. Matches themselves had to be kept dry, and an object like this was made to do just that. When we've had this object in our collection for a while, and it's always been discussed in terms of the person who bought it. It was bought not too far from here over in Chautauqua in western New York, but that was the only lens it was ever kind of talked about it through. And as we were putting this exhibition together, we thought, well, what other stories could this object have amassed over time? And we realized that one story we did not hear from or about was that of the maker, the person who originally made it. We don't have a lot of information about the person who originally made it, but what we do have is a really thriving culture and group of beaders that still work in western New York. And we were put in touch with two very, very skilled bead artists here in the area, Mary and Samantha Jacobs, a mother and daughter team. And they were able to tell us a lot of things about this match safe that we never knew. So I'm going to play you a brief video that shows them talking about the object.
My name is Mary Jacobs. I'm from the Seneca Nation, and I'm a member of the Turtle Clan. I have been doing beadwork since I was probably about a teenager, and I also incorporate the beadwork into traditional clothing and more contemporary items that you could use for like cell phones, purses, and hair pieces.
My name is Samantha Jacobs. I am Seneca from the Cattaraugus Reservation. Mary's my mother. I am a community educator with the Seneca Language and Culture Department for the Seneca Nation, and I work at the Stanley Sullyhuff Cultural and Heritage Center, where we teach community classes. On Mondays we do crafts, and on Tuesdays we do beadwork. So we are constantly sharing patterns and doing research to be able to bring those pieces back to our community to revitalize those beadwork pieces. So today we are here to talk about the match safe. Taking a look at it, we were able to distinguish that it was probably a picture frame pattern that they adapted to create a pocket on the front to hold the matches. As we're looking at it, we can kind of figure out, based on the style and the color of beads, that it's probably a Mohawk piece, done in probably a cottage style. So one family member probably did the pattern, another family member did the beadwork, another family member did the sewing. Based on the fringe, we can see that's similar to a Tuscarora style with the multicolored beads on the bottom. Normally, we would have seen spring purlin beads on those fringes. Looking at some of the different construction of the piece itself, we can tell that the pocket on the front is actually one large pocket that they then used 2 separate stitches with beads to make the centerfold in the middle to create 2 pockets. So that's something as a maker we're able to look at and figure out how to reproduce that in order to make sure that it pays homage to the original pattern, but also to be able to recreate it and then teach it to our own bead group to then revitalize those patterns within our communities.
We weren't quite sure what exactly this portion here on front of the pockets represents.
We thought maybe it might have been a stylized matches hanging out of like a bundle, which is interesting because it kind of is similar to when the Haudenosaunee Confederacy was formed. They had a bundle of arrows to represent strength. And in order to have a strong home, you need to be a home that's warm and to be able to keep your family protected. So they might be similar design motif there.
Back in the early 1900s, they needed to have some kind of stabilizer within the piece itself. So most of the time they used cardboard. One of the other things that we noticed on the back side, because we were able to flip it over, is that the cardboard that they used was probably at some time bent or damaged. So if you look right along here, you can actually see the seam, and if you can feel it, you can feel where the cardboard was probably one time it was completely flat, but unfortunately somebody probably bent that, whether it was up or down, whichever, but now it has caused a crease to be there within the cardboard itself. We did also notice that whoever did the beadwork along the edge, the stitching is beautiful. I will compliment them. It's nice and even. They made it so that the beads are laying basically on the front, and all you see is just that little bit of stitching on the back. Good job.
So a lot of the patterns that you would find on your pieces are passed down through the families. So you'd be able to take a look at the piece and figure out not only the community that it was made from, but also have an idea of which families created the piece itself. So even in contemporary makers, you'll be able to find those traditional patterns that they used, 100 years ago. They're still using them within the family because they've been passed on for generation and generation.
Right now, we continue to teach. We continue to encourage our students to make their own patterns, but we'd like to acknowledge whoever developed that pattern. So whenever we teach and we share any patterns, we have our students rather, actually put the year on the pattern, write that it was an original, and write the initials of whoever the pattern came from. So if it was somebody that I was sharing my pattern in 2022, they would write the initials MAJ and original. It's important for one thing when we teach is that we feel that whatever was taught to us, that we need to share that information, and we need to, again, acknowledge the people that gave it to us, and we want to continue, so whoever we teach, we encourage them to teach somebody else what they learned.
And that's really our way of making sure that those patterns are revitalized within our own communities so that it's not lost and it continues to go on.
So, you can see kind of what 2, professional bead workers who look at the history of beading in this area can add to a museum's understanding of an object, even though we had researched this object. And Chris was kind of preparing for this, for the live stream tonight. You know, he was kind of interested in this idea of, you know, what do I learn from a maker that I can't learn on my own? And so he's going to talk a little bit about that as he demonstrates a piece that he's making for you to kind of look at his way of looking at this idea of the maker and the value they bring to his process. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Troy. So I've been blowing glass full-time for just about 22 years now. And when I first looked at this exhibit, and specifically the maker's themes, the first thing I thought of, the first thing that I was kind of inspired by, was the ladies talking about how the piece was made, how they have skill in their trade, and how they know how to replicate it, basically. And it drummed up a story from probably my third or fourth year into blowing glass. And a lot of what we're going to do tonight, I'll just preface this by saying a lot of this is inspired by Venetian-style methods and techniques. So we're going to be making a very complex, very large goblet of sorts, sort of my own take on some of those Venetian techniques. But I remember trying to make a dragon stem goblet when I was probably 3 or 4 years in, and I hadn't had any formal training on how to do that. And so I went about my own way of doing it, and I don't want to say it failed because I actually put it together, but it was extremely difficult. I just gave myself a lot of challenges, and it made it really, really hard to do. And later on, learning from a lot of other glassmakers throughout my career, and specifically one thing I've been drawn to, Venetian-style glassmaking, I learned a really good approach on how to put some of those things together. So taking some inspiration from this maker's theme as glassmakers ourselves and how we can look at pieces and now basically say how this was done, how I can do that by looking at that. So I won't talk too much about that because Helen's going to talk quite a bit throughout the process. We're going to get right into the glass making. I do want to just introduce our hot shop. We have one piece of equipment that you're going to be seeing us use a lot of, and I did take some time to make a lot of parts for this dragon that we're going to be assembling because it would have taken about 4 hours without prepping it today. But the oven over here is called the garage, and I've made the wings, the head, and some optical pieces that we'll be joining, and a flower that we're going to incorporate in there as well. So what this garage essentially does is babysits glass for us. We can make parts and we can set them in that oven, which is roughly 1,000 degrees. And for our glass, that's where it's rigid and it's safe to keep in there. And we'll pull those parts out once we need them. But I'll get right into it. I'm going to kick the narration off to Helen. If anybody has any questions, she can field them. I probably won't talk too much during the process, but she can check in with me. And online, Amanda's going to be fielding those as well. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us tonight. Enjoy the show.
All right, what a great introduction. Let's give the team a big round of applause. Fantastic. Welcome, welcome all of you here at the museum yourself and, of course, online. We're really excited to have you join us on this special program. Again, my name's Helen. If you have any questions throughout the course of this evening, feel free to get my attention if you're here local or, of course, online. We can also field questions there as well with Amanda and the team. So throw them at us if you got them. We would love to chat with you. But yes, Chris is going to get started. We got Chris Rochelle here, Michael Beam, Katie Hubbs. There's going to be our 3 main glass workers for today. And everything we make starts out pretty much the same way. We need to get glass on the end of a pipe. So we are winding a little bit of clear molten glass around this hollow stainless steel blowpipe. Now, Chris did say that he made a lot of parts in advance just to help save time, but we'll be assembling everything together a little bit at a time, but he is going to make some things in person, of course, so you can see how they're made. Now, all of our glass in our furnace holds about 1,000 pounds of glass and runs at a high temperature of around 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 1150 Celsius, and it glows so beautifully because of that high temperature. So if our clear glass, we want to add color, we need to add that color separately. We do not melt our own color here at the museum. We instead purchase it separately and then just roll it onto the surface of our glass. Typically, glass color comes in either powder, which is what Chris is using, or what we call frit. These little teeny pieces and particles of glass. Now, the larger the grain size of that material is going to give you more of a polka dot effect, where the powder is going to be such small particles that when we melt them into the surface, it gives a little bit more of a smooth effect. Now, with all those little particles, though, we have the ability to add shadow and accents and maybe kind of mix those colors together. So Chris is starting out with just a coating of solid red glass. It will look very brown as we're making it, but trust us, we're making a red dragon here today. And then once he has some of those details and is finished, he'll also put a little powder on the outside at the end of it. That'll help bring out some of the textures and the highlights along this form. But trapping a little air pressure into that hollow pipe, it pushes through the soft material. And if we can't see through it, since we've coated it with solid color, we really just look for that volume change. So we saw it got a little fat, so we know that there's some air inside of there now, probably about the size of a golf ball. So this bubble is going to turn into the body of our dragon. Now he has already pre-made the head and a few other details for our dragon, but he wanted to make sure to give you a good idea of that sculptural aspect of making a creature like this out of glass. So you'll see Chris using lots of tools. We have our biggest one here. This is just a marver table. It's a big slab of steel. And by rolling the glass on that, it helps shape the glass, and it also helps cool the glass in certain ways. The dragon that we're going to be making has a lot of texture to it. So there's two ways, or a few ways, of adding texture to glass. One is to just grab it with tools. The other is to put it into optic molds. So Chris has gone down into an optic mold. And for those of you that are here, I can show you a big version of what he just went into. And these optic molds have various patterns on the inside. You can see we got quite a few of them to play with. But the beautiful thing about these molds is they don't really define what we make. They're just texturizing tools. So if we're making a blown vessel that has optics, we can leave those optics on the surface, blow the object out right away, and get really nice textures. So Chris is starting to segment out that bubble, squeezing certain areas, figuring out where the volumes are needed for the body of our dragon. He twisted everything pretty tightly as well. And I think we're going to add a wrap around the outside. This is one aspect that is somewhat traditional to the traditional Venetian goblet that this is styled off of. Now, one conversation that Chris and I had as we were preparing for this, he did say that when he first started doing these dragons, there are traditional styles, and then there are the versions that we make for our own. And I think that really speaks to even the show that we were talking about, the past and present. It's taking that information and that imagery and inspiration from an object, but shifting it in a way that you can learn the techniques and then develop your own voice within those techniques. So Chris is doing a dragon that's not necessarily traditional to Venetian style, but highly, highly influenced by it. So we've set up this other fun tool. This is 2 sets of wheels here, this roller wrap machine. Now, if those wheels are in line and you put your pipe on there, it's just going to be able to turn it really quickly. But if you offset those wheels slightly, then the pipe will travel as you're spinning. So it's kind of like the old typewriter styles. It always hit in the same place and the paper kept moving. So we're going to be able to attach a wrap very evenly distributed around the surface of that bubble by using that roller wrap machine. And we can set the distance to either have it touch really closely or be very thin, delicate line. Oh, I love that. What a great visual. All the way up. It's the same exact color we're putting on the surface as what we added. That was some great teamwork. That deserves a big round of applause. Very nicely done, Katie. So exact same color, but you can see what a difference it is when it's hot and when it's kind of hot. So we can see that glow of the material and kind of identify where the heat is in the material, especially on opaque forms that you can't necessarily see through. If you start to see an area get hot and glow really quickly and then lose that glow really quickly, that's a pretty good indicator that it's thin glass. Where if it's something that takes a little bit more time to get it to glow and then that glow seems to hold on to the piece for a while, that would be a good indication of thicker glass. so reflecting its heat energy based on its thickness. Now we have our reheating chamber here, and this is how we do a lot of our reheating to soften the glass as we work. Because that's really what glass making is all about. You get the glass hot where you want to change it, and you keep it in the colder ranges where you don't want it to move. 1,000 degrees is considered fairly cold for glass, and it is very rigid at that point. So we need to be careful not to go too much below that 1,000 degree range, or we run the risk of causing damage. But with good heat, it's got nice flexibility. Chris was able to get a good curve out of that body. And another thing you might notice as he's building this whole thing together as well is that traditional styles are generally rolling the pipe back and forth and keeping things centered the whole time. But as soon as you start creating things off-center, it changes a little bit in the way that you approach that glass. So as he was holding on to the tail bit, he was letting the belly kind of sag. So we're using gravity. We can use gravity to elongate or compress forms, or just kind of use them to create lovely curves. But you have to set up the temperatures to get just the right curve as well. So back and forth quite often you'll see into that reheating chamber. We have a lot of people wondering about how we see inside of our furnace. It's such a unique and fun view here at the Corning Museum of Glass. And it's not brought to us by a high temperature camera, but rather a specialized type of glass. There's a tiny little window in the very back of that unit. And those of you who are on this side, you might even see the little black square inside. Now, standard windows are made of soda lime glass, and that's essentially the same kind of glass that we're melting. So if we put a standard window in that reheating chamber, it would have just melted out of the back. Instead, we've added what's called fused silica, a specialized glass that has a very high temperature resistance, nearly 4,000 degrees, and is very optically clear. So changing the chemistry of that glass gave us the properties that we needed to have a temperature-resistant, nice window to peer through with our camera. So there Chris is adding some more color. The first layer of color that we added, we just rolled it through that form. But now that the form is a little bit bigger, it's got all that texture on the surface, if we were to just try to dab it in there, it really wouldn't stick evenly. We're not able to get the temperatures we need either to get that color to really stick to the surface in that fashion. So instead, he dusts it with the strainer and then doesn't heat it in all the way. So this is going to add a really lovely tactile quality, even beyond the texture that we added with that wrap. I think he was, on some of his earlier practices, he was also adding a darker color just to kind of add shadow. So we'll probably add a little bit more as we go along. You're going to see some wonderful teamwork here tonight. And it's so much easier to make complicated forms like this with good and talented assistants. You often see glassmakers work at least 2 people together, but you can assemble a large team of maybe 20 people if you had a really complicated project. You're going to watch Katie over here start to pull the parts out of that garage and delivering them to Chris. And everything has to be handled very gingerly. The critical temperatures that we hold the glass in that babysitter, if we pull it out of that babysitter too quickly, it can end up shocking the glass and breaking it. So Katie will be going back and forth. Look at that, beautiful. And pulling things from the storage area, putting them over the flame for a few seconds, and then introducing them over to our reheating chamber to get them nice and warm before we bring them to Chris to assemble together. You'll also see Chris using a lot of torch here tonight. We've got 2 options when we want to stick things together. One, you could just add a blob of glass like glue and stick your thing into that blob of glass, and sure, they'll stick together, but then you got all this blob of glass hemorrhaging out from underneath your beautiful object. So a much more refined way is to use this torch. just spot heating specific areas, making two pieces of glass hot enough where they want to contact that they'll bond and have a nice strong connection. These torches are both gas and oxygen, so they burn really hot and really efficiently. And Chris has even downsized. We usually have a slightly larger torch that we use here at the in the amphitheater, but he wanted an even smaller torch to be able to get into even tighter little details, because this particular sculpture has a lot of details. But there's our beautiful flower. And I was watching Chris make these flowers earlier, and if you look really carefully, they're kind of two different cones stuck together. These were originally two bubbles. So he blew a tiny little bubble, broke the tip open, and then cut into the sides of that bubble to flare open the petals. Then dropped a little extra pink color on the inside to give that lily-like effect on the inside. Once he had two of those little tubes or little shapes, then we were able to stick those together to create that final flower. But a really, really lovely technique. It makes for really nice, even petals. A lot of glass makers make flowers, and it's really interesting to see the different approaches that people have for that sculptural object, whether it's made from solid glass or hollow bubbles. So this is going to be a little foundation ball that we'll be able to attach our dragon to. And hopefully this isn't too much of a spoiler alert, but this is essentially what we're going to be building. This was the practice one that he did over the past week. So you can see right now we're working on that. I'm not sure actually which one this is. It's the top one or the lower one, but it's the dragon stem. I'll put this a little closer here so you folks can see it. So any questions that we have so far? Yes? The other pieces he made today, the ones that are in the oven? Yes, the ones that are in the garage were made today throughout the day, but if he wanted to make things a day ahead, we could. And he could accumulate all those parts, and then we could put them in that oven, but we need to warm the oven up slowly. Whether you're cooling glass or heating glass, it has to happen slowly, otherwise it'll thermally shock and break. Yes, exactly. So if we wanted to make something that was really complicated, that would take hours and hours and hours, instead of trying to do it all at once, he could just kind of keep making petals and parts and let them cool down and just get a whole box of stuff and then bring it all back up to temperature when it's ready. Absolutely. And that's a very common approach, actually, when you're looking at very complicated sculptural work. And it gives you the ability to maybe take those parts and do something else with them before you bring them back into the hot shop. So if he wanted to take one of the wings and maybe carve into it and make a texture or a design with cold working. Cold working is just approaching glass in a cold state, usually with grinding equipment made of diamonds or silicon carbide. So you can do a lot of cold working and then bring those parts back and warm them back up. There's limitless, unlimited possibilities with that kind of technique. So going down into a slightly different optic mold now, this one has some diamond patterns on it. Now, if we were to blow that piece out as an object right away, I did have a picture there earlier today, but it seems to be missing. But that would give us a really lovely diamond pattern. So the first one he made was just a plain foot, but this one looks like we're going to go for the textured foot. So we got a nice starter bubble. It's kept nice and hot. Katie brings it out, lets it drop onto the base. We do this hot method so that we have a true strong bond, and then also it can be cut free. Very nicely done. Let's give him another round of applause. We'll keep that encouragement going. It's towards the end of the day. Fantastic, thanks. So this blown foot, this is another very ancient technique, and you'll see very commonly in Venetian-style goblets. But right now, this little onion shape is closed off. And when forms are closed off, that means the air trapped inside, when it gets hot, will want to expand. When it gets cold, it'll shrink. So he needs to work quickly to get this open back up, cutting in a tight constriction line, deciding how much of that bubble he wants to keep and how much he wants to get rid of. Squeezes the tip to push air back into that bubble, kind of resetting the shape a little bit. And then using the diamond shears, just as cold steel, to thermally shock the glass, and a light tap is all it takes to break it free. So working quickly and efficiently, especially on these very delicate details. If you kind of take too much time or have to go for too many heats, the glass wants to ball up when it's hot. So if you kind of overheat things and work too long, you can end up melting out all those textures or thickening up the lip of the piece that you're working on. Chris has also expressed many times how the pair of jacks that he uses, the metal tools, are one of his favorite tools. And I'm almost guaranteed he brought his own tools to this game here today. But using those tight little blades, you can fold the lip on itself and then really open that form up. But these jacks, these are also one of the more ancient tools that we have in our collection. But those blades are a working surface. The back end is also a working surface. So it can be flat that you can push and shape things with. And then the blades themselves, they come in different sizes, different configuration, depending on the kind of work that you're going to make. If you're doing a goblet like this, like Chris, you got tight, tiny little blades that can get into tight corners and not have a lot of metal that's robbing heat away from the material as you work. If you're working really large scale and heavy glass, you wouldn't want to have a tiny pair of jacks and get so tight and close to all that glass. So you scale up and you get a much larger pair with maybe broader blades on them. But all of the jacks get a bit of beeswax added to them, and that keeps them from sticking to our glass and riding over the surface a little easier. Essentially, hot things stick to hot things. So if a metal tool gets too hot, touching that glass, it'll start to stick. We have to warm up the tips of our pipes to even have them warm enough to get the glass to stick to them. So that bit of beeswax just helps from getting those jacks stuck to our piece. So beautiful foot here. Now we're going to trade this over onto another iron called a punty. I believe that's what Katie's working on here. There's a lot of tradesies with this particular piece, back and forth, flipping things around. You really have to think ahead on how you set up the direction of everything and how everything comes together way in advance of putting it together. But in order to break glass away from one iron and transfer it to another, we just need to weaken the glass slightly by putting a constriction line we call a jack line. So on the far face of that, there is a tight constriction line. Chris is also going to cut in a little constriction line here. So ultimately, it'll separate at that line and not the joinery line where those two were touched together. But these tight constrictions narrow the glass down, give it a good direct place to be able to thermally shock. And if all goes well, we can contain those breaks only within those jack lines. But that's another thing that takes years of experience to build up the experience and understanding, to have the right shapes on those jack lines and the right delicate nature to get them to break easily. Look how easy that broke. Nicely done. You can give him another round of applause. Absolutely. So any other questions that we have so far? All right, how's our online community doing? Hopefully, if anybody's got any questions, feel free to field them on that online chat. And for those of you who are in-house, if you might have missed at the very beginning, we're actually doing a live stream right now. So this is being projected over the internet. And we have quite a few of these throughout the year. You can tune in. You can find the full list of any activities that we're doing right on our website, cmog.org, C-M-O-G, Corning Museum of Glass.org. And you can find the listings for those live streams. But one of the really lovely things about our live streams as well is that they eventually go up onto our YouTube channel. And there's thousands of hours of YouTube content there of glass blowing, demonstrations, special programming, all kinds of things that we've done, visiting artists. Chris has quite a few live streams in that repertoire. So this one will go up onto that YouTube channel probably in a week or two whenever we finalize all of the details. So this is going to be the foot. That means we need to start building our leaves on the bottom of that form. So Katie's got a paddle. This paddle is just made of metal. It is dusted with a kiln release to try to keep the glass from sticking to that metal. Because remember, hot metal, that's what we have to gather glass on. So if we get these parts too hot, they'll start sticking to that little paddle. So Katie takes really quick, brief heats, just keeping it warm enough so nothing will shock, but not change shape, not melt. And we once again use that torch to heat like glue so we can get them to stick together. Those little leaves were just, yeah, you can clap, don't be shy, absolutely. It's like magic while you're watching this, I love it. But those little leaves were also made by taking small gathers of glass on a solid iron, rolling it through green powder to get a really lovely green color tone to it. And then he flattens the little bit and uses a butter knife to incise all those little lines in the leaves. All right, so we have a really interesting question online, and it asks why the tools don't smooth out the texture that was put in by the molds. So I think what they're trying to ask of, if you imagine objects that you would rub onto the surface or grab onto the surface, you'd probably make a new impression or smooth out that texture. Well, the answer really lies in the entirety of the process of glass blowing, in that it's all about temperature control. So as we're working with these tools, as Chris grabs hold of that little leaf, we have it in a temperature that the object itself is the right temperature to not crack, but it's not hot enough that it's soft enough to take an impression. So if we did get it too hot, then he grabbed it with the tweezers, then absolutely, it would smooth out a texture or most likely add an additional texture. And when we were working with the blown foot itself, part of the key to keep the texture with using these molds is also in the setup. So a lot of beginners will go into those molds not hot enough. So you might have a little wiggle and you get in there and you pick up an impression, but it's not really going to pick up a strong impression, and the core of your bubble is a little colder, which means in order to get it moving and blown out and assembled, you need to overheat it to get it malleable again. Skilled glass workers go into the mold nice and hot, so the core of the bubble never loses that heat. You chill the texture into the surface, and then you're able to have enough core heat to stretch and move and manipulate that glass, keeping that texture prominent on the surface. But really great question. I really appreciate that. Thanks so much. So here we go, some fancy back and forth. They're doing some tradesies. Again, all about temperature control. So Katie's going for quick flashes of heat just to assure that nothing's getting too cold. Chris is starting to heat up the region that they want to attach the two together. So every time they trade, he just adds a little heat right to that connection area. When he recognizes the right timing and temperature, then he'll have Katie come around the other direction and they'll stick the two together. Chris is really good at identifying the good timing for this kind of thing. Yes? Yeah, that's a great question. So if we're looking at a complicated form like this, do the artists typically sketch it out beforehand and have that game plan? It kind of depends on the piece and it kind of depends on the artist. But here we go, lining it right up, and then we'll break it free from that other iron, and then it'll be attached. So for this particular design, as Chris had mentioned, it's inspired by past existing objects, right? That was some good teamwork right there. Very nice. So when Chris came to this project, he wanted to bring that idea of the historical reference that he wanted, but he wanted to make it his own. So he might have done a few illustrations or drawings. He's usually really good at also sketching proportion. So even if he wants to kind of fly by the seat of his pants and make up the design as it's coming along, you might have reference drawings to at least have measurements. Because when you're assembling a piece like this, he made a wing and put it away, and then he made another wing and put it away. And if you have two different size wings, it's not going to look very nice. So typically, yes, you'll at a minimum just mark out what your sizes are going to be, your proportions are going to be, use calipers to make sure you're keeping things within those boundaries so you don't end up having this like Frankenstein look to the sculpture in the end. Chris happens to be an amazing illustrator and really started out in university as more of painting and illustration, but really gravitated towards glass. And I think that his illustrations do influence a lot of the work that he does. But if you've made a piece, a lot of our demo pieces, if you've made a piece over and over and over, you're probably not going to be sketching that out beforehand. But just depends on the artist. So now we can start to heat up the top part of the neck. And he's already got a head made prior. And for those of you who are in-house, you might want to at some point come a little closer and take a look at the details within this object. But he's got a lot of really detailed object. It took him, almost an hour just to make the head. So we just didn't have enough time to do everything in person. But he's warming this up and can further stretch it. And this kind of harks back to the traditional goblet that has the dragon stem. It's usually made of like one string of glass that you kind of curl up one direction and you curl up the other direction. So you're working from two different directions to create this S-shaped spirals out of the glass. But one of the conversations that Chris was talking about with his inspiration for this piece was the first time that he tried to make one of these goblets. And as glassmakers, especially those of us who are a little bit older, before the invention of like a lot of the internet and getting things online and having thousands of hours of YouTube to watch, it was really difficult to get access to the knowledge of glassmaking. So you might get lucky to have a VHS tape that you could check out and trade with your friends, or maybe go and visit someone that was doing a demonstration. But otherwise, you're really just kind of looking at objects in collections, in books. And so you're trying to figure out how these objects were made. And when you're building a goblet like this, you might be building these structures and you got this amazing dragon, but then when you start to stack them all together, you realize that if they're not completely in line, it's really hard to open the foot or really hard to open the cup of the goblet. So as he's building this entire structure, he's also trying to think of balance points. And the story he told of the first goblet he made, he struggled so severely just because the angles were a little off. And so when you go to drop that foot and it's no longer centered and you're trying to open it up, you're just like hula hooping around with this thing, it's a big struggle. but now he's making it look way too easy. Years of experience figuring out where those balances need to be. And adding, once again, just a touch of powder. If the powder doesn't get melted in completely, which if he tried to melt that in completely, he'd lose that structure, he'd lose that texture. So he's putting it on the very end and just giving it enough heat to kind of make it stick, but it'll have this really lovely kind of velvety texture to the surface. That'll change the way the light transmits off the surface of the glass and give a really beautiful depth to this object that wouldn't exist if it was all just shiny glass. But in general, I think that the learning process of glassmaking can be a little overwhelming for beginners just because there's so much history involved. We've been blowing glass for about 2,000 years and working with it as a material an additional 2,000 past that. So about 4,000 years of history, which is a lot to be inspired by. And each region in the world has developed certain techniques, certain aesthetics. And so we're in a really lovely time in history that we have resources, just unlimited resources to be able to look at for inspiration. I think the hardest thing is trying to find your own voice within that material in the context of 4,000 years of history and technique. So little additions like these beautiful flowers are a really nice step towards Chris and his aesthetic. He works a lot with pink. It's one of his favorite glass colors. It does happen to be one of the more expensive colors as well. It has gold chloride in the making of that color. But using the pink color for the foot, the little highlights inside of the flowers. And now we've got our little head. The head also has bright yellow eyes. You can see all the beautiful detail that he pushed and pulled into that solid sculpture. Using butter knives and tweezers, little pokey tools to make the nostrils of our dragon. Oh, that's a great view. Nice job. Even has little horns sticking off of it. You can see how spot heating very specific areas, only the areas you wanted to stick together, stuck together. What do you think, folks? That's pretty awesome, isn't it? Very nice. Yeah, thanks, Anna. Another nice thing of using those torches is now that joint that he connected to that is the hottest part. So he still has a little time to be able to adjust it, and remember, looking for those balances. We don't want to stick the cup in the middle of the dragon's face. We want to stick it on the top of his neck so that we can see that beautiful face.
They're left and right in the garage. I'll do the left one first, but give me just a second.
So now that we've got the head attached, I heard them talking about working towards the next part, which is the wings. As he's adjusting the neck on there, he's also keeping a keen eye on the foot. We try not to get the punties hot enough that they're moving around and making things off center, but sometimes that can happen in the course of reheating and reheating and reheating. So you want to make sure that you're keeping even that foot nice and in line so that it doesn't end up being a crooked goblet in the end. He even went so far as to put tiny little black lines in those eyeballs. I don't think that they've got... Oh, he does have black lines in this one too. The practice one. Any other questions that we might have out there?
Hey, Michael, can you
Yes.
keep the left wing a good flash there? Bring it over here.
How does the color stick to the glass? I'm sorry, they're a little loud up here. Let me come a little closer. All those torches and air hoses, I can't hear anything. All right, so it's how we get the colors in specific areas on that piece. So in order to apply color, we have a couple different options. Now, one, you can just melt an entire tank of color and put that and just gather it out of there and then blob it onto whatever you want. But here at the studios, we typically would use either the frit or powder. So these are small particles of broken colored glass. They can be anywhere from a powder, which is what he's mostly been using, or it can be more of a pea gravel chunk. So as you roll your hot glass through it, it sticks to the surface of that bubble or solid blob of glass and melts in and imparts a color layer. So if you want to have colors in very specific places, you can either, if you had a bubble, you could maybe put one color on the top of the bubble, another color on the bottom of the color as you roll through it. Or you can do things like this, where you're adding additions to that object. So if you wanted to have the texture, the wrap texture, be a different color than the body, he matched them for this. But if we wanted that wrap to be a different color, we could have just rolled it through a different color and then attached it to the surface. So it's all just about pre-planning and figuring out where you want different colors to be. But the frit and the powder is going to be the easiest way to kind of add color to the outside of various sizes and shapes. The only trick is it has to be hot enough for it to stick. So if he were to try to roll that foot in color at this point, it's too cold. We'd never get it hot enough. The color just wouldn't stick. But the other way that we can work with color is bar color. It's the exact same material as our frit and our powders. It's just sold to us in bigger chunks. And if we want to start out with this, we would just break off the appropriate amount, warm it up slowly so it didn't explode, attach it to the end of a blowpipe, start melting it in so that we can make our starter bubble out of that color, and then gather all our clear glass on top of it, blow out our form, and this would create a very thin veneer of color on the inside of that bubble. So with that use of the bar, you would get really smooth and even color. And if you stack maybe one color and then you coat it with a different color, you could have an inside and an outside that look different. Just depends on where you add it to that bubble and whether it's opaque or transparent. And the lovely thing about glass is it can be transparent or opaque. So you can start to layer colors up, and they won't mix chemically very predictably, but they will mix optically. So you could put two transparents together and get the illusion of a third color just in the way that they're laid on top of each other. That's where some of these accents on the wings, he's kind of dusted just a little bit of gray powder, I believe he said he used. And it sort of settles into the high spots, almost like dirt settling into an old object. And it kind of highlights all that texture on the surface. And it's just about perfect placement of where he wanted all of those textures to be highlighted. Did that answer the question? Okay, great. Awesome. Thanks so much. Yes? What material is added to make glass pink? That's going to be gold chloride. So all colors are made by adding metal oxides and materials to the raw materials of glass. So our base glass is a silica, sand, soda ash, and limestone. So if we want to make pink, we put in gold chloride. If we want to make blue, we put in cobalt for dark blue and copper for light blue. We could use iron for green, manganese for purple. So different metals will impart those colors. Yeah. And we buy all of our colors just to make it a lot more versatile. I like to think of it like buying all the crayons and we supply the paper. So we got clear glass, 1,000 pounds of it to play with, and we can add any color and combination that we want. And again, remember that we're looking at a red dragon right now. The brown that you see is just reflecting heat rather than the actual color. So once this cools down to room temperature, it's going to be just as gorgeous as the bright red that you see here on the trial one. All right, some good questions. Yes. Ooh, that's a tough question. The cost of materials for a piece like this. Usually the material costs aren't the most expensive part of the process, but it's everything. So, you know, we've only got a couple pounds worth of glass. Usually the clear glass, depending on the brand name, it's going to be maybe $2 to $5 a pound. But you're looking at the colors. The colors are going to be, well, we buy them by the kilo, so they're going to be a minimum of $28 up to $150 a kilo. So when you're looking at the gold-based colors, those are going to be a lot more expensive than the iron-based colors for obvious reasons. So there's maybe $10 or $15 worth of color, maybe, in this piece. And the clear glass, it's fairly nominal amount. But the thing that really comes to the cost is the talent. I always say we don't buy glass by the pound, we buy it by the talent, okay? So you're looking at a very experienced glassworker with about 20 years of glassmaking experience, 2 assistants that also have at least 15 years apiece. Then you've got the facility that has the gas bill that's running 24/7 and all the parts that go into it. So by the time you pay yourself and pay the assistants and pay for all the materials and pay for all the color and everything else, it adds up pretty quickly. I can't quote the price that Chris would charge for this particular piece, because that also is a factor. Depends on who makes it, and they can charge different amounts based on their fame. And Chris is an amazing glassworker, so yes, he could probably pull quite a bit for a complicated piece like this. But I can't answer what that question would be. You'd have to talk to him offline and find out what he would charge for a commission like that. But in general, we never price things here at the museum in general, just because there are so many factors that go into that game based on the history, the experience, the type of piece that it is. But that was an amazing first start. Now we've got our goblet bottom half. So now you're going to make the top part, right? Awesome. So this is where I start getting even more nervous. But now we've got this safe, warm, and happy, and our glass babysitter over here. And probably one of these folks will just hang out with it and make sure that it doesn't move and change shape. We also have some rollers that are set up with a little motor that'll go really slowly and keep things turning. And that'll help keep it on center. But just like when we're blowing glass, if it gets a little off center, it's probably just going to keep getting worse. So we try to keep things centered, and we try to keep it in a nice stable temperature. And so that's why they're going to hang out and watch it for a few minutes to just make sure that it's for certain not still pivoting on any of those hot joints that we put it together with. So here we're going to go for the bowl section, and that's going to be another hollow bubble. So starting out with a little bit of clear glass wound around a hollow stainless steel blowpipe. Once Chris organizes this glass in a nice even fashion, slightly cools it by cradling it in the wet wooden block, then he'll add air pressure to create that hollow form. It's really important to take the time to not only gather properly and have a nice even gob of glass when you come out of the furnace, but also to make sure that it is nice and centered once you're seated before you start that air bubble. If you blow a crooked bubble, you're probably going to have a crooked piece. This is the foundation for that entire future object. But look at that, precision, beautiful. As I said, he's a bit of a magician. Chris makes a lot of these things look way too easy. So just squaring that up, making sure it's just the right shape that he can gather over top of it. We tend to build up our glass in layers because of its fluid nature. It's kind of hard to pull out large quantities at once out of that furnace. So we tend to build it up in these layers called gathers. Now, to make it easier to add another liquid honey-like layer on top of the first, we cool the first layer down. Let it stabilize. He's using compressed air to just cool it a little quicker. It's kind of like waiting for paint to dry, just making it go a little faster with a fan on it. And you can see how it's lost a lot of its glow as well. So we know that it's a good stable temperature. And now we can go in and wind more glass right onto the surface with one, without losing all of it back in the furnace, and two, without collapsing that bubble. And of course, we've got to go into the pink. So here we've got a nice tray full of little chips of that beautiful pink cranberry glass. So you can see how they coat the surface pretty directly. But once you've coated the surface, there's no more will stick. So you got to go back into the furnace, melt that first layer, soften that glass back up, and then you can go back for another layer and get that to stick. So depending on how many times you go into that reheating chamber and come back for more glass, it's just going to make more density of that color. And in general, these colors are pretty dense because we're using small amounts of expensive color and lots of clear glass for most of our objects. You know, if we took any of these objects and broke them in half, I know they look solid, but it'd just be a super thin veneer of color sandwiched in those layers. So you can use small amounts, blow it all out, and get a really lovely color. This is also an opportunity that if Chris wanted to do a fade effect, you know, you could roll the tip of that bubble through a different color or do it 2 or 3 more times and change some of that density as well. But generally 2 layers is plenty. It fills in enough of the little nooks and crannies so that all that polka dot effect that we get from using that frit becomes fairly universal. Are you making this one a textured too? All right. This is a step fancier than what he did for his practice trial. His practice one was just smooth and even, both the foot and the bowl part. But this time he's going to go into a much bigger optic mold than he did for the foot. We've got a couple sizes of these diamond facet molds. We've even got a really huge one right here if we want to work really large. But you need to pre-shape your bubble to be just the right shape to fit down into that mold. This particular mold is a little bit hairy because you can get stuck, but Chris never gets stuck. Basically, all those little diamond points that reach in means you can't go in and come out cleanly without either collapsing the bubble a little bit or something to wiggle it out of there. And generally, we say it's not a matter of, you know, if you're going to get stuck in the mold. It's usually just a matter of when. And almost every glass worker that has attempted to use that tool at some point has gotten stuck. But you need to set up your bubble to be just the right proportions, just the right thicknesses, so that when you go into that mold, you pick up a really beautiful impression. You don't create thick or thin areas where you don't want them, keeping everything nice and balanced. And again, going into that mold nice and hot keeps the core heat in that material, meaning that it has flexibility to be able to continue to shape it without overheating the surface and losing all that beautiful diamond facet texture.
If you're okay in that position, you know, if not, just slide it over to the left part again. I mean, the foot's the furthest thing back from bringing it, so it should be fine. But just quick flash and more tool.
Now, this particular bowl form that he's going for is a fairly low bowl. And those can be really challenging forms to make. Of course, Chris is really good at it, so it's going to look really simple, but he's got a nice round bubble right now. He's focusing heat mostly on the bottom 3/4 of that bubble. And when he comes out, he'll hold it slightly up into the air. That'll allow the glass to backset on itself, kind of gravity compressing that bubble. But another key step is the fact that he's put his hand over the end of that pipe. If you hold a hot bubble in the air and into the air and there's no air trapped inside of it, the bubble will collapse. But by keeping your hand on the back end, that means whatever air is already in there will stay in there, so it kind of just resets itself rather than collapsing. So now we've got a really lovely low profile on the bottom half of that bubble. Making low bowls can be complicated because you really need to think about those transitions of where the shoulders happen, getting nice even temperatures and no ridges as you go to open this up. Chris usually also trims away an excessive amount on the top of the form. So we're kind of really just looking at what the bottom curve will look like. And then once it's on the punny, you open up the top edge of that curve. I think I'm going to like this textured version. This is going to be a really nice addition. Have a lot more light dancing around that piece. But this entire demonstration is, again, inspired by our current exhibition, past, present, that we have up in our 35 Centuries gallery here at the Corning Museum of Glass. It's a really interesting and lovely exhibit. I highly suggest checking it out while you're with us here today or plan a visit. Whoa. And it really speaks to the objects. A lot of times you go to a museum and you see all of these objects and they might be lovely, they might have a little bit of descriptor of where they were made or what era they were made in. But it's not often we get the backstory for a lot of these kind of objects. And so this exhibition really tries to bring to life the concept of what's behind all of the objects that we see. So one of the themes in that show is maker, and that's what Chris is gravitating towards, the maker theme for this particular one. Taking influence from other experienced artists or historical references, extrapolating out the information and the curiosities that you have for those ancient or older pieces, and then putting your own voice into that conversation. So Chris was highly inspired by the Venetian-style Dragonstein goblets, but this is taking it definitely a step further, not only in scale, but also in the lovely additions of a little bit more personality to that dragon, the details in the eyes, the flowers. Reattaching a punny so we can break it off the original blowpipe, accessing the top half of this form to be able to open it up. And a little cold steel and a light tap. That's all it takes to break glass. Nice. You see just how tight those little constriction lines that Chris put into there. Glass is always going to break wherever it is the weakest. So especially as you start building these very complicated sculptures and goblets and bits and pieces, you really have to think about those structures. So putting in the weakest area that you want it to separate and maybe beefing up areas you want to have a little bit stronger. So in addition to this live stream that we're doing here today, we've also had a couple additional live streams based on this past and present show. So if you want to look those up in our archives, Jeff Mack did a really beautiful job. Right, he was the first one that we did earlier in the spring. Eric Goldschmidt and Caitlin Hyde also did one that's relating to the Turkish eye. So the kind of a talisman of safety and protection. So they did a really interesting collaboration with that. So again, lots of resources on our YouTube channel to check out. We just hosted Nancy Callan and a couple other artists. We have a lot of teachers coming to the Corning Museum of Glass, the studio of the Corning Museum of Glass, teaching. Renowned artists from all over the world come here to participate in our summer programs especially. And a lot of students from around the world also come here to learn. Summers are a great opportunity to delve a little deeper into processes. But we do offer classes year-round here at the museum, anywhere from a very beginning 45-minute experience as a make-your-own, all the way to more intensive classes that could meet once a week, or a weekend, or 1 week out of the year. Look at that, extreme trim, very nice. You might have noticed that Michael was holding a paddle up there, and he wasn't doing anything to the glass. All he was doing is offering a kindness to Chris, hovering a paddle between your thumbnail and that intense hot material. Just lets you concentrate a little easier rather than feeling like you're catching on fire as you're trimming around that low bowl. But we got lots of classes left to be had upcoming in the fall. I know a lot of the summer classes are full, but you can check online. There's full listings. You might still have a few openings for the remaining summer classes and our upcoming fall and winter and spring classes. In addition to having a world-renowned facility to teach in, we also, of course, have the resources of the museum and also our Rochelle library, which is the most comprehensive glass-related library in the world. And so as a place to come and learn to work with glass, you have that much more opportunity to learn historical references and have inspiration, taking advantage of those additional offerings. Look at that. Just open it right up. No problem. Big low bowl. It's a magician. And a beautiful job keeping those textures. You can see all the light bouncing off that. It's really kept those prominent textures on the surface of that bowl. But look how slowly he's turning as he's walking around, and then as soon as he sits down, he kind of spins into the paper a little bit. We can use centrifugal force to whip our glass away from center and help us shape. But you have to set up just the right temperature to make that happen. Otherwise, the lip would have led and he would have made a platter rather than a nice low bowl. You can even see, I know he's spinning kind of fast, but you might even notice where that diamond pattern, when you go down into the mold, it kind of pushes the glass color a little bit away from areas. So it's almost like each little diamond is now almost clear with that very subtle transition of density in those colors. All right, so we're going to start pulling that goblet stem back out of our garage. So Katie will warm that up slowly over the fire. That garage is designed to have flame only on one side. So we kind of consider one side a hot side and one side a cold side. It's all around 1,000 degrees, but just a little bit different. So we store things on the cold side and pull them into the hot side when we're ready to pull them back out, and often hover them near that flame to get them as warm as possible before we pull them out. If it's too low of a temperature and we go to reintroduce it to the intense heat of the reheating chamber, that could cause some thermal shock. So taking your time to warm things up properly. But here's where that forethought of how you're going to end up putting and assembling a piece together really comes into play. We're going to do an inside punny here. So they stripped off the excess glass and then rolled it on the dirty floor. That left a little bit of crud on the very tip of that punty. That will hopefully be just enough crud to help it break free, but not too much crud that's going to leave evidence of it on the surface of the glass. Light tap. Beautiful. So, yes. Yep. Yeah, it's a lot easier not having to fight around that thing. All right, so inside punny, ideally this wants to leave the least amount of mark when we go to remove it. So remember, we talked about the weaknesses. We want to make sure that that is the weakest spot on the entire thing when we go to remove that. So Katie's getting this all warmed up. I think, Michael, you have a little ball or something? I think we've got one more little connector section, a little optic ball that we're going to put and connect these two together. This is another great way of helping that the lining things up and getting the balance properly so that you've got enough real estate to be able to attach a big bowl to it or a big foot to the bottom, is to create these transitional knobs. That was also using a straight-walled optic mold to create all those textures on the sphere itself. Playing that tradesy game once again, heating up the two areas that we want to join and bond together. These torches were originally designed for flame working. Mounted on a table, you can introduce tubes and rods into that flame to create small objects or large objects. Want another door? Are you all right, Chris?
Give me about 1 minute, Katie.
So Katie's been reheating, going for flashes, using the torch, warming it up a little bit, getting everything just right. So will Chris sign this piece somehow? If we wanted to sign the work, the most common way is to use a Dremel tool with a diamond bit in it, and you just scratch it onto the surface and when it's cold. So yes, he might end up signing this in that fashion. One final trade, and then we'll do the assemblage.
All right. Coming over? Yep. You're dragging it up.
Beautifully lined up. A little water on that constriction line. Breaking it free. Beautiful. Nice teamwork. Woo. Anybody else sweating a little bit? Woo.
You can go ahead and glove up.
All right, so now we know we've got one piece. That's fantastic. So just from old wives' tales, we're not going to clap now until it's safe in the oven, okay? As we go just for good luck. But Chris will give this a couple final flashes. They'll use some dry wood paddles to just make sure everything's straight. And remember that connection is still really hot, so there's still some flexibility in that joint. So we want to make sure that before we put this away in our annealing oven to allow it to cool slowly, everything is stable. Because it might not seem like it's hot or moving around, but that's a lot of weight on the top of that sculpture. And so even a subtle bit of heat is too much, you put it in the oven, it might just sag just ever so slightly when you put it away. Which side you want there, Katie? Left or right? Okay, right? Okay. So we do need to let everything that we make cool slowly under controlled conditions, especially with soda lime glass that expands and contracts as it heats and it cools. So if you leave something out too long, it will cool unevenly, thick and thin, shrinking at different rates and cause cracks. But if we put pieces into a controlled environment and allow them to cool slowly at a rate that the thick and the thin, the big and the tall and the small will all shrink together, then they'll survive that cooling process. So Katie has put on some protective gear, including Kevlar gloves, which are heat protectant gloves that allow us to grab hold of glass. Got a nice face shield on to keep the eyebrows from burning away when you reach your head into a 905-degree oven. Woo! Look how easy that came off. A little torch on anything that might be a scar mark on the inside, and then away in our oven it goes for safekeeping. Amazing. Let's give it up for Chris Rochelle. I never got to see that original goblet, but that one is amazing. Very nice. And so we will again have this up on the live stream, and we will also have a picture of that final object also on that live stream. So you can come back and check that. It'll take maybe 2 weeks or so to get it up online. But thank you so much for joining us here in person and online. We hope you enjoyed this demonstration and a little inside view to our past and present exhibition. Have a great evening, everyone.